introduce San Jose City Councilman Pete Constant. Pete was born in Dearborn, Michigan, and raised in West San, Michigan. Before he was a councilman, he was a police officer, a retired San Jose police officer. He's a small business owner. He's educated. He got his master's and his bachelor's degree at St. Mary's College over in Moraga. His wife is Julie Constant, and they have 5 children. Let's give a huge San Jose welcome to Pete Constant.
Sorry, I hate being restrained, so I like to wander when I talk. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the City of San Jose. Now, I have to tell you before I get started, I'm an optimist. So hopefully it will have a happy ending. But I'll tell you, there's not a lot to be optimistic about in local governments right now. And I'm going to try and paint as accurate of a picture as I can in the time allotted for what's going on in San Jose. But then I'm going to tell you the things that we're doing to fix the problems. Because if I weren't an optimist, I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't think that there were things that we could do to fix the problems. So many of you know, I've come here a couple years in a row now to talk to you about the budget. And the picture is pretty much always the same. I come here and I tell you we had this huge deficit and we balanced the budget. But the problem seems to get bigger and bigger each year. And no matter who you talk to in local government, you'll hear about the fact that we have all balanced our budgets. Because we have to. Unlike the state that can ignore the Constitution, the state legislatures, or the federal government who just decides to print more money and raise the debt ceiling and do all the crazy things that they do. In local government, we have no options other than to balance our budget. It's the cost of those balancing actions that concern me. So I want to paint a picture of what San Jose has looked like over the last 11 years. Because we've had 10 straight years of budget deficits. A decade of budget deficits. Now, like most businesses and organizations, we do projections. We look forward. We say, okay, what do we have coming in the future? And we do for 5-year periods. There is no black ink in our forecast for the next 5 years. So some of my colleagues like to have their head buried in the sand, and they say, oh, we're just going through a rough spot. Don't worry, it's going to be better next year. This is just a slump in the economy. This is something that's just beyond our control. The country's in a recession. Oh, home prices are stalled, but they'll come back next year. Oh, the Dow crashed, but it's climbing. And as soon as the Dow hits 13,000, everything's going to be better. But really, over a 15-year period, do you think that's just an anomaly? Or do you think it's really a signal of serious structural problems in how government is funded, how government is run, and how government spends your money? That's what I think it is. We have had deficits. If you take those 10 years and you count up the deficits and you add them cumulatively, it's been about $500 million, with a B, billion dollars that we've had deficits. So what that means is we resolve those deficits. There's only a couple things that we can do. We can raise taxes, but local government doesn't have much control to do that, thank God. Or else we'd have such high taxes you wouldn't be able to afford to even buy a Coke at the soda store. But we can't really do that easily. Or we cut services or lower our expenses. So what we've seen over the decade in San Jose is we've seen a workforce go from 8,000 to 5,000, which for streamlining and efficiency, that might not be a bad thing. But along the way, we've crippled entire departments of the city. We've stopped doing some of the very basic essential services in the city. And I think we have failed our taxpayers in a number of areas. And the reason we do this is because when the economy is going up, everybody has a great idea on how to spend the increased revenues. It's easy to fill a vacuum. You have money, new services just get sucked in, and you have this pretty new program, and this pretty new program, and this pretty new program, and this pretty new program. But when budgets get tight, nobody wants to cut the program that they started or upset the interest group that got this program or this program or this program and so on down the line. So the natural reaction is, well, let's cut everything 5%. Let's cut everything 10%. This year, let's cut everything 15%. And what you end up is all these programs that get partial funding, none of them accomplishing anything, but all of them staying in existence. And that's what we have occurring in the city of San Jose right now. So what has been driving our costs? People ask me that all the time. What in the world could be driving your costs to the extent where you can't afford to have barely half the employees you had 10 years ago when you actually have more revenue coming in now than you did 10 years ago? What a lot of people don't realize, when you look at our revenue charts, it didn't start dipping until just 2 years ago. Prior to that, every year we had a little bit more revenue. The problem is we spent a little bit more money, and a little bit more than that every single year. And the main driving cost that we have found in the city of San Jose is our cost of employees. Now, it should come no surprise that if you're a business like the city of San Jose that doesn't have a product, and you only provide services, that your biggest cost would be your employees. Because who else is going to provide the service but a person? You know, you have to have a firefighter respond to a fire, a police officer respond to an emergency, a sewer technician working on the sewers, all those things. You have to have people to do the work. The problem is the rate at which our total compensation has increased for those employees. And I'll give you a couple of examples. As it was mentioned, I'm a former city employee. I was actually even a union leader for the police officers union. So I think I have a pretty good picture of how things work inside City Hall from both the employer and union perspective as well as an elected perspective. If a police officer had retired in August of the year 2000, at that point their salary for doing their job every day was $72,000 a year. That's for the man or woman you see driving in uniform, driving a blue and white patrol vehicle. And at that time, they had an 80% retirement. So if you do the math, that's about, if you work 30 full years, you get a $58,000 retirement for the rest of your life. Now fast forward just 1 decade. If you were that same police officer and you retired August of last year, the year 2011, or 2010, sorry, I'm confused, 10 years later, your pay for doing that same job is $118,000 a year. And the pension benefit was increased to 90%. So do the math. Now that same person gets a pension benefit that's $106,000 a year for life. Now when you look at the fact that the pension went from 80% to 90%, that seems like a small increase. When you look at the fact that their salary went up, it's a pretty significant increase. But when you look at the actual cash in pocket retirement benefit, it doubled. Now it doesn't take a genius to figure out why we have a pension crisis. We doubled the benefit in less than a decade. And we have thousands of people who are getting pension benefits. 10 years ago, if you retired, you got an increase every year that corresponded or aligned to the consumer price index for the Bay Area. And it had a cap of 2%. Now if you retire, it doesn't matter what the economy is doing, it could go negative like we've seen, yet you still get a 3% annual compounded cost of living increase every single year. And that's why we have our compensation costs rising so high. Compensation has gone up 40% in several different categories in the city. And that's why we have a problem meeting our obligations. So to put it in real dollars and cents, this year we had a $114 million deficit that we had to fix. $52 million of that was due just to the increase in our contribution for pension benefits. Last year we had a $118 million deficit. I can't remember the exact number, the millions get mixed up, but 50-something million of it, nearly one half of it, was due to just the increase in the pension contributions. And when those pension contribution increases come, it's not for that year, it's for every year after that. So next year, we're looking at having a $78 million deficit, and we just balanced our budget. So when someone tells you how great their budget is, ask them what next year and the following year is, because what happens is the can just gets kicked down the road a little bit. So next year we have a $78 million projected deficit, which I bet you will hit $120 million. So when I'm here next year, you guys can all tell me if I was right, because I think it's going to hit $120 million. And of that, over 50% is due to increases yet again in our pension contributions. And the following year, 40% of the increase of the deficit is due to increased contributions. The next year, 70%, and the final year, 100% of the deficit is due to increased pension costs. So that's why when you see what we're doing at City Hall, when you see the headlines and you see the people accusing us of union busting and all those things, because we're trying to address the pension crisis, it's because it's a real crisis. So all these millions, let me put it into context for you. A decade ago, oh, we don't have to go back a decade, let's go back a decade, because that number's easy to remember. A decade ago, our pension contributions were about $74 million a year for the entire city, all the employees. In the year 2015-16, which is 4 years from now, we anticipate that that's going to be over $400 million just in pension contributions. And that's using a very optimistic outlook. Optimistic in the fact that we think our investments will do well. I don't know about you, but I've been watching the stock market. It's not looking as good as we'd like it to be. A realistic assumption sees that those pension benefits will cost us about $500 million a year. Our total general fund budget is less than $860 million. That means we will have enough money to employ 1,600 people if we hit the $400 million, and less than that if we hit the $500 million, to run an entire city that's 178 square miles and has 945,000 people living in it. And remember, we're the ones that provide the police and the fire and the 911 dispatchers and the libraries and the community centers and the paving of the roads and the signal lights and all those things that you typically think of a city doing. What's going to happen? We already have more than that number of employees just in our police and fire department. So we could just shut down, almost have martial law, have cops and firefighters and do nothing else in our city, because that's all we'll be able to afford. Sounds like a big problem, right? It's not our only problem. That's what concerns me. So we're going to take a little math test here. We have an unfunded pension liability of $2 billion. Everything I'm going to give you is in the B's, okay? $2 billion. So we have $2 billion owed there. We have an unfunded healthcare liability of $1.65 billion. You can round that down to 1.5 and add that up. Then our roadways, our infrastructure for our streets, curbs, gutters, lights, signal lights, markings on the road, stuff like that, for the next 10-year period and everything we have behind, is going to cost us $1 billion to catch up on.